Agile life cycles are iterative and incremental. True. Scrum is a heavyweight framework that helps people, teams, and organizations generate value through adaptive solutions for complex problems. False. Information radiator is the generic term for any of a number of handwritten, drawn, printed, or electronic displays used by Agile teams. True. Acceptance test-driven development, ATDD, involves team members with different perspectives, customer, development, testing, collaborating to write acceptance tests in advance of implementing the corresponding functionality. True. Commitment, openness, and courage, these are known as the 3 pillars of Scrum and the Scrum principles. False. Burn down charts and burn up charts track the amount of output, in terms of hours, story points, or backlog items, a team has completed across an iteration or a project. True. Sprint planning addresses, what can be done this sprint? True. Collective code ownership is the explicit convention that every team member can make changes to any code file as necessary, either to complete a development task, to repair a defect, or to improve the code's overall structure. True. In Scrum, 2 or more product owners advised where possible. False. Definition of ready involves creating clear criteria that a user's story must meet before being accepted into an upcoming iteration. This is typically based on the INVEST matrix. True. The Scrum Masters and product owners turn a selection of the work into an increment of value during a sprint. False. The single most important practice is the retrospective because it allows the team to learn about, improve, and adapt its process. True. On a Scrum team, work must be released every sprint. False. The daily Scrum events are fixed-length events of 1 month or less to create consistency. False. A T-shaped person has a defined, recognized specialization and primary role, but has the skills, versatility, and aptitude for collaboration to help other people when and where necessary. True. A sprint must always be 2 weeks. False. Iterative approaches have a single delivery. True. The Scrum Team is accountable for maximizing the value of the product resulting from the work of the Scrum Team. False. Agile and Kanban are subsets of Lean. True. The Scrum Team is accountable for establishing Scrum as defined in the Scrum Guide. False. Continuous integration is the practice of merging code changes into a shared repository several times a day in order to release a product version at any moment. This requires an integration procedure which is reproducible and automated. True. The sprint review is not a working session, so the Scrum Team should limit it to a presentation of accomplishments. False.
Lead time is the time between a customer order and delivery. In software development, it can also be the time between a requirement made and its fulfillment. True. A Kanban board is a visual workflow tool consisting of multiple columns. Each column represents a different stage in the workflow process. True. Lean thinking increases production and waste while it focuses on the essentials. False. An Agile team frequently releases its product into the hands of end users, listening to feedback, whether critical or appreciative. True. There are 5 artifacts in Scrum. False. BDD is a practice where members of the team discuss the expected behavior of a system in order to build a shared understanding of expected functionality. True. Empiricism asserts that knowledge comes from reading and making decisions based on what is understood from studying. False. There are 4 Agile manifesto values. True. During the sprint, the product backlog is refined as needed. True. The purpose of the daily Scrum is to give status and solve problems hindering the product goal. False. In the Scrum Guide, the reader is advised to immediately begin tailoring Scrum. False. Burn charts are an essential artifact and mandatory in Scrum. False. And the daily Scrum, we could use a format known as walking the board instead of the 3 questions. True. The Scrum team consists of stakeholders, 1 Scrum Master, 1 Product Owner, 1 Architect and developers. False. A Scrum of Scrum is advised to be used in main Scrum to deal with blockers and impediments. False. The sprint is a container for all other events. True. The Scrum team is accountable for effective product backlog management. False. The sprint in Scrum is a fixed-length event of 1 month or less to create consistency. True. The ideal size of a Scrum team is 3 to 15 members. False. All the work necessary to achieve the product goal, including sprint planning, daily scrums, sprint review, and sprint retrospective, happen within sprints. True. In Scrum, there must be backlog refinement every sprint. False. During the sprint, no changes are made that would endanger the sprint goal. True. During the sprint, quality does not decrease. True. The developers are required to conform to the definition of done. If there are multiple Scrum teams working together on a product, they must mutually define and comply with the same definition of done. True. The purpose of the sprint review is to refine the product backlog and give % complete status to project stakeholders. False.
Cycle time is the time between a customer order and delivery. In software development, it can also be the time between a requirement made and its fulfillment. False. Agile can be used in any industry and not just IT. True. During the sprint, copious change is permitted to align with the Agile manifesto. False. Sprint planning addresses. Why is this sprint valuable? True. Leading, training, and coaching the organization in its Scrum adoption is the product owner's responsibility. False. Sprint planning addresses. What can be done this release? False. Each sprint may be considered a short project. True. Sprint planning initiates the sprint by laying out the work to be performed for the sprint. True. In Scrum, a development team orders the work for a complex problem into a product backlog. False. Sprint planning addresses. How will the chosen work get done? True. Too much transparency could disable effective inspection. False. The Scrum team may also invite other people to attend sprint planning to provide advice. True. Ensuring that the product backlog is transparent, visible, and understood is the developer's responsibility. False. During the sprint, scope may be clarified and renegotiated with the product owner as more is learned. True. Sprints enable predictability by ensuring inspection and adaptation of progress toward a product goal at least every calendar month. True. In Scrum, the first event is the Daily Scrum. False. The purpose of the Daily Scrum is to inspect progress toward the sprint goal and adapt the sprint backlog as necessary, adjusting the upcoming planned work. True. The purpose of the sprint review is to inspect the outcome of the sprint and determine future adaptations. True. The product owner is accountable for the Scrum team's effectiveness. False. The sprint review is a working session and the Scrum team should avoid limiting it to a presentation. True. Kanban good practice is to maximize your work in progress. False. The product backlog is an emergent, ordered list of what is needed to improve the product. It is the single source of work undertaken by the Scrum team. True. Sprint planning addresses. What can be done today before our next meeting? False. The sprint backlog is composed of the sprint goal, Y, the set of product backlog items selected for the sprint, what, as well as an actionable plan for delivering the increment, how. True. In Agile project management, scope is fixed and cost is flexible in order to be agile. False. Scrum employs an incremental, predictive approach to minimize predictability and to control risk. False. The definition of done is a formal description of the state of the increment when it meets the quality measures required for the product. True.